want to turn your attention, please, to the insert that's in the bulletin so you can follow along with the flow of the sermon, the message this morning, our teaching. If you do not have a copy of the story, they're available for you. If you just want to raise your hand, somebody can grab one for you. They're in the back. Anybody need a copy? Turn to page 275. It's the one without a page number. Has been, and well, several of us have taught through this series thus far. We began with creation and we're working our way to the book of Revelation. And we're telling the story in narrative form, just as it is in the Bible, only it's been abridged, so to speak, and fit into one small volume here. So that we can follow along and get a flow, chronology, a year-by-year flow of the story itself of God's not only creation, but act of redemption and virtual reconciliation of all of us to Him at the end of time. And in the story, we've had the upper story, which is the story of life here on earth from God's perspective. You know, and we've been able to read through the pages of the story in the Bible. If you want to turn to Esther chapter 1, we're there. As you read through the pages of the Bible, you learn that God is at all times throughout this story interacting with humanity and guiding humanity towards His virtual end of the plan, the culmination of the plan, which is to seek and to save those of us who are lost and who love Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior, the church. Now, when you get to the book of Esther, Esther is unique in many respects. Because the book of Esther is less like a Bible book than any other book in the Bible. It's more like a novella. In fact, I have taught this book in my literature class in high school to 11th and 12th grade high school students, and enjoyed it thoroughly. It's a book rich in the history of the Persian Empire, in the relationships of men and women in that empire, and in God's providence. However, in this story, God is conspicuously absent. His name is never mentioned in the book of Esther. Get that? And it's in the Bible. So what's the lesson for us from God's perspective? Because today we're going to read about the lower story. And it is a challenge for us to take one step up and peer into the upper echelon of the story and see God at work, because it's not that obvious. Now, last week, Ben shared with us the book of Ezra. And Ezra, after, you remember, started in creation and everything, and then there was this huge fall. They had kings. The kings blew it. The kingdom was divided. Nebuchadnezzar came along and took the northern tribes of Israel into captivity, and then Judah was taken later. And then in Ezra, Cyrus, who would be Nebuchadnezzar's grandson, released the Jews and sent them home. 70 years into their captivity, they went home. But in today's story, we are addressing people who stayed for a very particular reason. And we will see that as we go along. Now, throughout the story, we've been dealing with the name of God, and the whole premise of the Bible, the whole premise of the story is that God is with us always. He's always present in our lives. God is never absent. The telling point is when Moses is in the wilderness and he has this confrontation with God, and there's a bush and it doesn't burn up. It's on fire, or it appears to be on fire and doesn't burn. And God calls Moses out of the bush and tells him to come close, take off his shoes, and finally they get down to, okay, I'm from Egypt, where we have a God for everything that walks, breathes, or eats. Who are you that doesn't consume? And God says to him, I am. It's the Hebrew verb of be. I am. Wherever you are, I am. That's the assurance that we have. Wherever we are. No matter what we're doing. We could be right in the middle of sin like Cain and Abel. And God's right there. Calling us, moving us out of a life of debauchery. So, things go pretty well. Now, this word, that becomes the name of God, Yahweh, is, in your NIV Bible, you will see it. Every time you see the word Lord capitalized, that is the Hebrew verb of being, I am. So when it says the Lord God, that is Yahweh, or I am your God, wherever you are. So Moses is going along and things are going pretty good. And he's leading the children of Israel in the wilderness. And then he goes up on Mount Sinai and receives the Ten Commandments from God. And while he's away, they have this incident with what's called the golden calf. And Moses is informed by God that things aren't going too well down in the valley. So he heads off the mountain and he runs down. And he discovers that Israel's behavior is bewildering to him. It's a sin against God. And basically he says, what do I do with these people? What? You've called me to lead them and they won't even follow? What's up with that? So Moses decides, I'm the only thing these people have going for themselves. I have God's favor. If it weren't for me, they'd be all dead. So, Moses goes back up on the mountain and says, okay, I've heard your voice, God. I've seen the earth tremble. I've felt it tremble. I've seen the smoke. But that just isn't enough for me. I want proof. Sound familiar? I want proof. He said, please allow me to see you. Oh, God looks at him and says, you missed that scene in later Raiders of the Lost Ark, didn't you? Where you don't live if you see me? But he says, okay, I'll do you one better. See that big rock over there? I'll hide you in that rock. I'll cleft the rock. I'll hide you in it. I'll put my hand over it. And you can see me as I pass by. So that, in fact, does happen. And the idea that we get from the way the Hebrew is constructed is that God is always seen after the fact. After he's created through our lives, picking up the pieces of our pitiful existence and putting them back together again for us. And have you ever asked yourself, where's God in times of trial and struggle? And then later on you look back and you go, oh, there he was. He was there, and there he was. And actually, his handprints are all over this. Well, Esther is one of those stories. Just like that. It's a story of intrigue. It's about life in the king's palace in the Persian Empire. It's a story of affluence, decadence, marital strife, cabinet meetings, beauty pageants, political wrangling, attempted annihilation of the Hebrew people, and on and on and on. It's a very sordid story. It would make a good movie. It really would. It would make a great movie. People would pay to see this thing if it was actually in film. But the thing that we learn from it most of all is that faith is confidence in the unseen. So if you'll start with me on page 275, remember it's still without the page number. We'll read the first opening pages, and then I'm going to try to fill in the gaps of this story. So this is what happened during the time of Xerxes, The Xerxes who ruled over 127 provinces stretching from India to Kush. Kush is Egypt. So we're still reading. Never mind, we'll come back to it. At that time, King Xerxes reigned from his royal throne in the citadel of Susa, which is in modern-day Iran. And in the 3rd year of his reign, he gave a banquet for all his nobles and officials. The military leaders of Persia and Media, the princes and the nobles of the provinces were present. For a full 180 days, 6 months, he displayed the vast wealth of his kingdom and the splendor and glory of his majesty. When these days were over, the king gave a banquet lasting 7 days in the enclosed garden of the king's palace for all the people from the least to the greatest who were in the citadel of Susa. So in the actual capital area, like Washington, D.C. The garden had hangings of white and blue linen, fastened with cords of white linen and purple materials, silver rings on marble. That means something to somebody. All this stuff. There were couches of gold and silver on the mosaic pavement of porphyry, whatever that is, marble, mother of pearl, and other costly stones. Wine was served in goblets of gold, and no two of them were the same. And the royal wine was abundant, in keeping with the king's liberality. By the king's command, each guest was allowed to drink with no restrictions, for the king instructed all the wine stewards to serve each man what he wished. Let us sink in. They're pretty drunk. Got it? You get the picture? Okay. They're pretty drunk. Queen Vashti also gave a banquet for the women in the royal palace of King Xerxes. Now on the 7th day, when King Xerxes was in high spirits from wine, he commanded the 7 eunuchs who served him. I don't even know how he remembered their names. Mehuman, Biztha, Harbona, Bigtha, Abagtha, Zethar, and Carcass, to bring before him Queen Vashti, wearing her royal crown. Stop there. This is a Persian king. That's all she's got on the problem. Talk about reducing a woman to a commodity. This text does it in grand form. In order to display her beauty to the people and nobles, for she was lovely to look at. But when the attendants delivered the king's command, Queen Vashti refused to come. Then the king became furious and burned with anger. Wow. So what do you do when it's obvious, at least in the circumstances of the moment, that God isn't present? And what do you do when you find yourself asking, where's God in all of this? I don't know what, there's nothing to gain from the text that Vashti is a believer. But I have no doubt she's probably going, well, wait a minute, this isn't fair. You want me to come and parade naked in front of a bunch of debauched men for your sick pleasure? No, I'm not going to do that. Women have faced struggles on a daily basis, such as the one Vashti's facing in this text, only in different ways. There's other ways to demean a woman. Spousal abuse, objects of ridicule, or sexual scorn. And I think it's imperative for us men to take a good look at this text and realize that women are not simply eye candy for our sick pleasure. They're people, they're human beings, created in God's image. And we applaud women who are willing to take a stand for themselves. And I think us men need to learn to trust that God has given woman to humanity as completing him, not competing with him. Even though, when it's all said and done, Xerxes banishes Vashti from the kingdom, he can't banish her from God. He's still there at her disposal. God is never absent, or never think, rather, that God's absent from my life. It doesn't matter what you're facing. Never think that God is absent from your life. Now, to catch you up on this story, oh yeah, I needed to tell you about Xerxes. We didn't get there, did we? Where's Xerxes? There he is. See, Hollywood has a recent photo. Even though he reigned 470 BC, they've got a brand new image. I don't know, cuneiform or something, but there he is. And if you saw the movie 300, did any of you see that movie? Some of you did. This is the same era. This is the same Xerxes who fought the 300 Spartans at the Battle of Thermopylae. So there he is. And let's see his kingdom so you get a grasp of how much this guy had. That's his. That's his. This is India over here, and the Arabian Peninsula down here, and that's Africa over there. He owns all that. That's all his. Wow, dude's pretty powerful. So what happens is, history has it that he goes to the Battle of Thermopylae with 100,000 supposedly Persian men, gets his kicked, and he comes whining back home and decides, well, you know, I'm going to do what every good president would do. I'm going to throw a big party for myself because I made it back alive. And so he throws this big party, and his point of throwing the party, you see, is to get all the provincial governors together to see that, oh yeah, he lost in Thermopylae, which he was probably in trouble by then, which is over there. See Greece over there, see Lydia, and go to the left, not the west. Okay, so the Battle of Thermopylae is over there. So he comes back and he goes, hey, got beat, so what do? What every good politician would do, I spin it. And so he just makes it look good, and he genders support. That's what this whole party's about, is financial support, to back his efforts to go back and beat up on the Greeks, because he's a sore loser. Well, once Vashti's out of the picture, now you got to understand too, he's the Shah of Persia. He's like the Shah of Iran today. He's the Shah of Persia. He's got a bunch of wives, but he really liked Vashti. She was the queen. So he decides, okay, well, I got to replace her. So they have this thing in the kingdom throughout this whole provincial area. They have a contest, a beauty contest, like the Miss America pageant without the bikinis. And they have this huge pageant, and all the young women who are beautiful get to be are taken into the king's care, and then they get it's Club Med all the way. I mean, they get spa, they get a mani and a pedi every day, they get the works, these girls do, and they're treated like queens. And the whole point is to prepare one of them to take Queen Vashti's place. So she's got to look hot. You know, look at him. You saw him. And he's probably only got about 50, so he needs another one for sure. So along comes this guy named Mordecai. He's one of the Jews that stayed behind. He's got a cousin whom he's raising, and her name is Esther, and she's a knockout. And so, long story short, she wins the contest, and she becomes queen. Okay, so let's catch up to the text then, starting with the second point. Okay, so we've already done never think God is absent. Moving on to point 2. After these events, King Xerxes honored Haman. Now, Haman is the the nemesis of this whole story. Haman is what you call the antagonist of the story. He doesn't like Mordecai. After these events, King Xerxes honored Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite. Now, that's important. I'll get back to it. Elevating him and giving him a seat of honor higher than that of all the other nobles. All the royal officials at the king's gate knelt down and paid honor to Haman, for the king had commanded this concerning him. But Mordecai would not kneel down or pay him honor. Then the royal officials at the king's gate asked Mordecai, "Why do you disobey the king's command?" Day after day they spoke to him, but he refused to comply. Therefore, they told Haman about it to see whether Mordecai's behavior would be tolerated, for he had told them he was a Jew. Yeah, that's pretty good. When Haman saw that Mordecai would not kneel down or pay him honor, he was enraged. Yet having learned who Mordecai's people were, he scorned the idea of killing only Mordecai. Instead, Haman looked for a way to destroy all Mordecai's people, the Jews, throughout the whole kingdom of Xerxes. You know, the stuff that happened in the Holocaust in World War II isn't new. They tried to do it right here in this story. Tried to annihilate the entire Jewish race. In the 12th year of King Xerxes, in the first month, the month of Nisan, the Pur, or a lot, was cast in the presence of Haman to select a day and a month. And the lot fell on the 12th month, the day of the month of Adar. Then Haman said to King Xerxes, "There is a certain people dispersed among the peoples in all the province of your kingdom who keep themselves separate. Their customs are different from those of all the other people, and they do not obey the king's laws. It is not in the king's best interest to tolerate them. If it pleases the king, let a decree be issued to destroy them. And I will give 10,000 talents of silver to the king's administrators for the royal treasury." He says, "I'll lie in your pocket if you let me have my way." So the king took his signet ring from his finger, this is Xerxes, and gave it to Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the enemy of the Jews. "Keep the money," the king said to Haman, "and do with the people as you please." So a day is set, a year in advance, the total annihilation of the Jewish people. That's what comes out of this whole story. This dude Haman, he has a problem with Mordecai because Mordecai is Jewish. And if you go back in the story to the King Saul was instructed to kill Agag, the king of the Amalekites, and he didn't. And now Esther and Mordecai have to deal with his sin years and years later. You ever felt like that? You ever felt like what you're facing right now is that you're doing? Life is messy, and some of life's problems aren't solved like some romantic movie. This isn't Sleepless in Seattle. Haman, the descendant of Agag, wants to destroy the Jewish people. What we learn is something that God gave to Moses in the Ten Commandments. In Exodus chapter 20, verse 5, when he says, simply, the consequences of a family, of a sin in a family, are going to be experienced generations away from the fact. Pornography, drug or alcohol abuse, divorce, overeating, gossip, whatever. Sometimes it feels like the sin that we face isn't just my mistakes in life. It's got another origin. And in this part of the story, we're seeing, from our perspective, we're seeing that what wasn't taken care of by Saul is now having to be dealt with by Mordecai and Esther in Iran, of all places, worlds removed from their world of Palestine. So the one thing that we also have to take from this story is that we have to recognize that sin, or realize that sin is always present in my life. Sin is always present. never going to escape us. We want a rose garden, but there isn't one. We will run out of that. The Garden of Eden. Sin is always present. So, here's Esther. She's being tended by all of she's in a secluded place in the palace. She's protected. She's got servants, female and male. She's being watched after. She's fed. She's clothed. Everything well. And she's doing good. She's great. Has everything locked up. And all of a sudden, something comes up that disrupts her party. Somebody didn't take care of Agag. And so now, her life is threatened. Mordecai, all this time that Esther is in the palace, Mordecai has been sitting outside getting messages to her and checking on her to make sure his cousin is okay and that she's being treated well. And he's also a voice. He's a voice of reason in her luxurious life. And he says to her, basically, Esther, I'm sorry, girl, but you know what? You're going to have to go in and see Xerxes. You're going to have to go talk to the king on behalf of your people. What's Esther's first response? I think you got the wrong number. Are you sure you're calling me? Because this is ludicrous. You saw what happened to Vashti. You think I'm going to walk into the king's presence unannounced? That's not protocol. I've not been asked. I'm a woman. I have no business there unless he calls for me. And what am I going to tell him? I'm a Jew? Are you crazy? And Mordecai said, no, I'm not crazy. That's what we need to do. So, Esther's words were reported to Mordecai, and he sent back this answer. Don't think that because you're in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance